the interest of everyone's time, welcome to the fifth class pertaining to growing your exports. I think that you know that today we're covering kind of the legal and regulatory aspect of exports and things that you have to consider. I want to start off by thanking the Arkansas Manufacturing Solutions Department, which is part of the Arkansas Economic Development Commission. They are the sponsors of this series of classes, and that allows us to be able to offer these classes at no cost to you. And so their mission is to maximize enterprise value for manufacturers through innovation, operational excellence, sustainability, and leadership development. I think that you know that we're part of the District Export Council. We're obviously the Arkansas District Export Council. There are 60 DECs, as we call them, throughout the United States, and we're charged with encouraging and supporting the export of goods and services that will strengthen the individual companies, stimulate the U.S. economic growth, and most importantly, create jobs. And just in case some of you are new, I'm Rudy Ortiz. I'm the chair of the Education Committee for the Arkansas District Export Council, and my business is the Strategic Business Services. That's the name of the company, and I'm a management consultant for SBS, I call it. So as you guys know, we are having a series of 6 classes, and you see there the different classes that we've already had. Today we're covering trade regulations and legal issues, and Mr. Graham Catlett, who has been a member of the DEC for a very long time and has been the chair of the DEC at least a couple of times that I'm aware of, and is a super strong supporter of the District Export Council and its mission. And so let me see here. Can you go back one slide there? No, my apologies. Go another one, please. My apologies for. Yeah. Anyway, so I want to remind you, everyone who's attending, that for those people who choose to go through all 6 classes, even after the fact, because of course this is being recorded, and so all the classes are going to be available. But for everyone who has gone through all 6 classes, you'll be eligible to receive a certificate of completion, and that's kind of what it will look like, and it indicates that you in fact did go through all 6 of the classes. So I hope that you choose to do that, and once again, you'll be able to go to. Why don't you go ahead and go to the next one, Ms. Heidi, our YouTube channel, and you'll see that that they will be there. In addition, we're going to have a drawing. Miss Heidi, the drawing is at the end of next week. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, for this book here, The Travels of the T-Shirt, kind of shows you from A to Z, like what happens when you're trying to sell T-shirts. And so I hope that everybody will choose to be in on next week's class as well, and to go through the entire program. So today's speaker, as I said before, is Graham Catlett. He's the managing partner for Catlett Law, and he assists private companies in developing commercial, legal, and political strategies for their growth in domestic and international markets. You know, one of the things that's really, really interesting about Graham is that he owned a company in Russia where he was importing American food, and I suspect other food as well, into Russia for like 12 years or something like that. And he was one of the very, very first people to import foreign goods and foreign food into Russia, and he did that for a number of years. And so he is not only an international attorney, but he knows exactly what it is to export goods into foreign countries, and all the ins and outs of what's required to be able to do so, and to do it profitably and legally, and with a minimum pain. And so, Graham, if you will take it away, would really appreciate it.
Thanks, Rudy, and it's a pleasure to be with all of you today. And I know that you've been looking forward to this as the most fun topic in the export series. Legal issues are always the thing that seem to get everybody's interest for some reason. But seriously, it is a pleasure to be here. And today I want to primarily go through a checklist type presentation with you so that you can be aware of the issues that you might face as an exporter. And then if you encounter any of those issues, then you can find ways to drill down a little bit further. Let me see if I can get my screen to share. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. Then the first thing I want to do is just summarize where I want to go today, and those topics will be to first talk about how an exporter can manage his or her risk. The second are various business models that an exporter may accept and develop. Third is to talk about export sales contracts, then distribution contracts, then U.S. export regulations, and finally, foreign regulations and trade barriers and free trade agreements. Before I get into any of those, I want to mention to those of you who own your own business or are partners that before you even analyze the legal issues of exporting, please look at your own company and the governance methods and issues relating to the organization of your own company. Because often I find people having more problems with their own company than they do with exporting. So a word to the wise is please take a look at issues like governance and transferability and what happens in case of a calamity with your own company. Now, the summary really for managing risk is on this slide. And you may think these things are crazy, but let me say that they set the baseline for managing your risk as an exporter. To the extent that we can do these things, then we are managing our risk very well. But as you'll see as I read through them, it's almost impossible to satisfy all of these. And so if you have to vary one of these in order to make a sale, then think thoroughly about what the effect on your company is going to be to make those changes. Now let's go through them. The first one I say is sell direct and never leave home, because leaving home opens you up to a lot of other issues and requirements of foreign jurisdiction. The second one is to sell only to good folks from a good place. We'll talk about dispute resolution and rule of law a little bit later. The third characteristic is to try to get your customer to prepay in full, or next best is with a confirmed letter of credit or an insured receivable. Of course, that's not always possible. The next characteristic is to only sell ex works. And ex works means that the risk of loss and possession and title transfer occurs at your dock. So once the goods leave your dock, you have managed that risk successfully. Next, no warranty, no bribes, provide that Arkansas law governs the transaction, and that any disputes are arbitrated in Arkansas. As I say, if you can accomplish all of these, then you are managing your risk to the greatest extent possible. But if you want to make sales, you're probably going to have to modify one or more of those. So it may not be easy for you to relax, but at least you have a checklist of items that you can review and focus on those that you have to vary. Let's talk about business models. Most exporters sell direct from the United States. That is the simplest and the most straightforward and risk-free method of selling. But it's not always possible to do that. Sometimes you have to have a person or a location in your market abroad. And we can accomplish that by using an agent who works for you either exclusively or with other companies, a distributor, a representative office, a wholly owned subsidiary, or a joint venture, partnership, or shared ownership of some kind. Of course, as we go down the list, they become increasingly complex, and issues such as taxation and employment rules in local companies, in local countries, become even more important. So keep this checklist in mind as you are developing your export sales program. Now, the first main topic I want to talk about are sales contracts. And the question that I get quite a bit is, do I need a contract? Well, my answer is no, you don't need a contract unless there's going to be a dispute. If there's not going to be a dispute, then you don't need a contract. But how do you know when you are making that transaction and negotiating it, whether there's going to be a dispute at some time down the road? And the answer is you don't. And so, of course, you need a sales contract. And no one goes into a contract or a transaction thinking that things are going to fall apart. If they did, they wouldn't have done it. But it happens, and it happens more frequently than we may like. And so the purpose, in my view, of a contract is to have enough detail so that if there is a dispute, the dispute can be answered without litigation by looking at the terms of the contract. Now, that's different from what a lot of people think. They say, well, I want the simplest contract possible. Do it on this cocktail napkin if you can. But that really doesn't solve the problem. The problem, as I said, is how to avoid litigation, because litigation is going to cost much more than what you want to solve the dispute. And so it is much wiser to try to think through things that could go wrong and provide for them in the contract so that you don't have to go to litigation. As far as the terms that go in a contract, first, of course, are the names of the parties. And for sure, try to know as much as you can about your buyer. In many countries, a contract may not have much meaning at all, but it's based more on the relationship between the parties than it is the physical written contract. And so for sure, try to know the reputation, the experience, and the propensity for disputes from your party. Another essential term for a contract is the price. And the price is more than what we sometimes think of, just the per unit price. You must think about what currency the price is going to be stated in, and what if that currency fluctuates. You have to think about weight and quantity changes and make sure you've provided for that, because if the quantity is different upon arrival than it was, particularly in bulk items, than it was as you thought it was upon shipment, then what's going to happen? Or if some of the items fall off the truck along the way, then what's going to happen? So take into account what will happen in case of weight or quantity changes. And of course, you must provide for those incidental items regarding an export sale, which are taxes, insurance, freight, unloading, and inspection. As we said at the beginning, if you sell X works, then maybe none of these are going to be a problem. But otherwise, these become essential terms in a sales contract. There are more essential terms, in my opinion, and the next is payment. The timing of the payment is one part of it, because often our customer will want us to accept some deferred payment, part now, part later, or part never. So keep that in mind as you're negotiating the contract as to how the payments will be made. And you must match the payments to your financing. Some of your financing may not allow you to include the product in your borrowing base if it's outside the United States. And so make sure that you've got enough cash from your customer in order to pay off your working capital loan if that is part of the terms. Next, the methods of payment need to be specified as another essential term of your sales contract. Payment before shipment. We've had cases, even in Arkansas, about buyers paying with credit cards, and then the seller will ship the goods. But after the buyer receives the goods, for some reason, the buyer will reject the credit card payment. And under the terms of the credit card agreement that the seller has with his bank, that payment can be reversed. Letters of credit, of course, open account, government insurance, XM and SBA. I think you've already covered those, or you will, and private insurance. All of those are essential elements of the definition of how you're going to get paid. And so that must be specified in your sales contract. And finally, as far as essential terms, there must be a detailed goods description, quality and quantity, the delivery date, what happens if they're early or they're late, the delivery method, and there I recommend that you use the Incoterms. And for those of you who are not familiar with it, Incoterms is a system of providing trade terms to a contract. It is not a contract itself, but it can be incorporated into your contract, and it provides for issues such as the transfer of possession, the transfer of title, and the risk of loss. But there is a book from the International Chamber of Commerce that summarizes these Incoterms in good detail, and I recommend that you buy the book. But the delivery method is a critical part of your contract. A second category of issues that should be in your sales contract has to do with dispute resolution. I said before, the only reason that we have a contract is to avoid disputes. And so if there is a dispute, we need to decide and have provided in the contract what's going to happen in that case. And the first issue is what law is going to govern. If we're selling to customers in the United States, generally the Uniform Commercial Code will apply. And that code is pretty much the same in every state. Maybe Louisiana has a little bit different, but still most states have virtually the same Uniform Commercial Code, so it's not really an issue. But if you're selling to an overseas buyer, that Uniform Commercial Code may not apply. And there may be something that applies called the UN Convention on Sale of Goods. And what is that? Or you could have the local law of the jurisdiction in which your buyer resides. And what in the world law would that be? So in your contract, you should provide what law applies. And I recommend that you, as I said in one of the early slides, you provide that the Arkansas Commercial Code is going to govern your contract. The second issue about disputes is, where are you going to resolve a dispute? And again, for an Arkansas exporter, you want that place to be Arkansas. But if you don't provide, then it could be someplace out there somewhere, which increases your costs to travel, to hire lawyers, to resolve the case to an extent that you probably will never go to the expense and trouble of collecting the debt unless it's a substantial. And then finally, what method of resolving the dispute? And today we often recommend arbitration rather than litigation. So for dispute resolution, those characteristics I suggest be in your sales contract. Now, they're also helpful terms. I don't think they're necessarily essential, but I think that they are helpful to you in negotiating a transaction. The first is warranty or disclaimer. You know, if you generally sell something, then whether you want to or not, there is an implied warranty about that product. And you might want to disclaim that warranty so you have no liability for an implied warranty under the contract. If you do provide for it, then think about what's going to happen if it breaks. Do you provide service? Or what happens if it breaks in transit? Whose responsibility is it? Another term that's important is indemnification. What happens if somebody gets sued and it's not your fault, but you still get sued? Are you going to be indemnified by your buyer or some other party? Protection of intellectual property, of course, we know it's very difficult, and many companies have taken the position that they won't send their best and brightest or newest products to areas that don't have a respect for intellectual property because it's hard to protect it. Confidentiality. Do you mind if your buyer spreads the terms of your contract among others? Or do you want to protect that? What about non-competition? Do you want your buyer to agree that he's not going to compete with you in a certain geographic area? And what about solicitation? Will you prevent your buyer from soliciting your own employees so that the buyer doesn't need you anymore, and your employees can tell them where the method of handling these kind of transactions without you? And then finally is no diversion. Sometimes you will specify a geographic area into which the buyer can only sell, and you don't want him selling or her selling in some other region. Now let's turn to distribution agreements, because you may choose to use a distribution agreement. And if so, then these are characteristics that we sometimes impose on the distributor. Minimum inventory, minimum marketing expenditures, that the distributor have a marketing manager that is responsible for promoting your products over others. What about promotions? Do they have to have promotions a certain number of times a year? Do they lose their distributorship if they don't attain certain sales goals? Can they have competing products, or must they agree not to have a competing product as long as they're carrying your goods? No diversion, and then also whether there's going to be a limited territory or not.
Graham, if I can break in for just a second,
Yeah.
one of the things that I really want to emphasize that that Graham was covering is this idea of distribution and laying all these things out, because in the United States, if we have some sort of legal problem, we can take it to the courts and we can expect that things will be done fairly. But in other countries, the laws are such that trying to end a contract with a distributor is can be very, very difficult or near impossible. So one of the things that you have to be very careful is to lay all these things out, and of course to do your due diligence in terms of the distributor, because if you don't and you think that you can just end it the way that you would in the US, you would be wrong.
Thank you, Rudy. Those are good points. So we've covered the duties of the distributor. Now, the distributor, you can expect, will want some duties of the producer. And so these are the common things that producers are asked for. And so before you get into negotiations with your distributor, you should be prepared for how you're going to respond to these requests. The first are terms. They don't want to prepay. They want translated marketing materials, labeling in their own language. And can you adjust the product for the taste or customer profile of this new area? What about trademark registration? Who's going to be responsible for that, and who will own the trademark? Will you contribute to marketing expenses that are incurred by the distributor? If so, then what that's going to be, and how often are you going to give it advice, and will you provide for an exclusive territory? So those are things that you should be aware that your distributor may ask of you. Of course, there are other contracts too that will come up as part of your exporting. There'll be financing contracts and letters of credit and transportation. And I mention transportation specifically because you should note the exclusions in those transportation contracts and the type of insurance, because there is both an all risk coverage and a specified peril coverage. And you should be aware of the difference in those two and how they can affect your transaction and costs. Now, I've talked generally about sales contracts and distribution contracts. There are contract forms that you can purchase from the International Chamber of Commerce that are pretty good. And they set out many of the terms that I have talked about here. And you may want to go online and check into buying them. Not that you want to use them specifically, but again, they're a good checklist of issues for you to cover for your own transactions. Now, let me turn to United States rules relating to export. And these are things that can bite you. So we, of course, will not go into all the details of all of them today, but they are things that you should be aware exist. And the first one are the OFAC economic sanctions. They've been in the press quite a bit lately because of the sanctions that our government and Western European governments have imposed on Russian companies and Russian individuals and those doing business with Russia. And there are serious sanctions if we do business with one person who has been included in one of these lists. There are also boycotts, and there are rules about complying with boycotts or not complying with boycotts. In fact, the state of Arkansas has a law that if you do business with a state, then you have to sign an agreement that you will not participate in a boycott of the state of Israel. There are anti-dumping rules, anti-terrorism, of course, and money laundering, which is becoming and has become over the last 10 years or so an extremely large problem, which complicates the transfer of money internationally. There are also U.S. export controls, and these are categorized in two different ways. First, if they're related to the military, then the regulations that govern them are ITAR regulations. If they are mixed use, dual use, or not military type products, generally tech and computers, then the EAR, the Export Administration Regs, will govern those. And I'll direct your attention to both of those. Another field of U.S. rules has to do with corrupt practices. And we have the Federal Corrupt Practices Act, which generally prohibits a U.S. person, company, or an individual from paying a bribe to a foreign government official in order to sell our products. Now, I use some qualifiers there. First, it applies to U.S. persons, and it prohibits the paying of a bribe. Now, bribe is not just a payment for the facilitation of something that would be done anyway, and it is only those payments made to foreign government officials that qualify. So under the federal U.S. Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, it does not apply, it does not prohibit our companies from paying a bribe to an officer in a private company abroad. However, in many countries, those private, so-called private companies are actually subsidiaries of the government. And so that can bite you. So if there is, of course, you want to avoid a bribe in any case. You want to follow the Walmart route and not pay or accept anything. But it just doesn't always work out that way. And so I caution you about the United States Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. Other countries have somewhat similar rules, and there is a United Nations Convention Against Corruption. But we in the United States are seeing an increasing number of prosecutions by the Justice Department on bribes given by U.S. companies to sell their products or services abroad. Of course, in the U.S., we also have laws that can affect not only our exports, but also our local products, such as our employment laws, our environmental laws, trade laws, tax laws, and U.S. antitrust laws. The next category of legal rules we have in the United States are treaties. The United States has treaties with a bunch of countries, and in those treaties, it will say certain things about the taxability, the standards, the bureaucracy, avoidance methods for conducting business with certain countries. And so if you're doing business with a country, I urge you explain or understand that treaty, and I'm going to talk about those a little bit more in a minute. Now, once you have satisfied yourself that you're in complete compliance with U.S. laws, you're not home, because you still have to comply with foreign rules. And here is a checklist of things that could become relevant to you as you sell your products abroad: customs clearance, trademark protection, import licenses and special duties on those products, labeling, packaging, marketing, consumer product and health. And let me say that in some countries, those rules are more stringent than they are in the United States. Product and quality standards, product warranty and specification. So if you are responsible for any of these issues, then you need to drill down more carefully into what the topics are that you're responsible for. And frankly, even if you're selling Ex Works, if your buyer does not understand these issues, if you're dealing with an inexperienced buyer, then things are not going to go well, and you're not going to be able to continue making sales. So it is incumbent on you to make sure that your buyer understands these issues, even if they're not your direct responsibility. I said we're going to talk about free trade agreements, and let me do so because I think this is a big deal. A free trade agreement is a treaty between the United States and another country which reduces or eliminates customs duties. It agrees on product standards. It reduces documentation. It allows our companies to sell to the foreign government. It allows service companies to supply, and it provides for fair treatment for investors. We now have 20 of these free trade agreements, and they cover about 47% of our goods exports. The first one that we had was the treaty with Mexico and Canada, NAFTA, 25 years ago. Now that has been revised, of course, and we have made additional free trade agreements. I suggest that as you're developing your export plan, you look at these 20 free trade agreements to see if you can do business in one of those countries. Because if you can, it eliminates or substantially reduces a lot of the hassle that you would have in dealing with a country otherwise. As we know, doing business in Mexico and Canada is relatively simple because of the treaty that the free trade agreement that we have. Doing business, on the other hand, with Brazil is much more difficult because we don't have, we're still subject to the duties and so forth of doing business with Brazil. Doesn't mean that it's not possible to do so with a country that we don't have a free trade agreement with, but it can be a lot simpler. The future of the free trade agreements is a hot political issue. During the Obama administration, it was proposed that all countries on the Pacific Rim enter together and make a Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. I say all countries, of course, China was left out. And the idea was that this group of Pacific Rim countries could enter into a free trade agreement fostering trade, leaving China out in the cold. Well, the Trump administration didn't think that was a good idea, and so the United States withdrew from those negotiations. The other countries went ahead with it anyway, and they now have a free trade agreement among the Pacific Rim countries that leaves out China and the United States. I think they've held a place for the United States in case we decide we want to join it, but it does not seem like it is politically acceptable right now to increase the number of multi-country free trade agreements. And so we may not enter that for some time. And my question here is free trade politically acceptable? Of course, the issue is although they worked seemingly well to reduce costs in the United States and reduce the price of goods in the United States, the argument is they also exported jobs, or we lost jobs because we increased our manufacturing in some other low-cost jurisdictions. Now, because of our political issues with China, it seems like a lot of those jobs may be coming back to North America. Some are coming directly to the United States. Some are going into Canada and Mexico, take advantage particularly of the lower rates of pay in Mexico. But this issue of free trade agreements is one that you should be aware of, and at least in my opinion, analyze for possible trade markets for yourself. Now, I reluctantly open myself up for questions, but I am limiting those questions to only easy questions. But I will offer myself to be available if you have any questions at any time. You're welcome to email me, and I'll show the slide with my email address again. But as part of my assistance with being a member of DEC, I'm happy to assist exporters at no cost. And so the best way to contact me is through an email that I'll provide for you. But in the meantime, if you have any questions, I'm happy to try to answer them.
Very good. Graham, as always, a super job. You know, ladies and gentlemen, the reason that we have these series of classes, and we put on about 14 webinars a year on a variety of exporting and supply chain related topics. And the reason we do that is because one of the things that holds back some people from either doing exporting at all or limiting the exporting to maybe, you know, Canada and Mexico is because of concern of what they don't know. And that's what we're really trying to minimize here is the lack of knowledge about things that are critical for you to understand. And you know, the old saying about you don't know what you don't know. And we're hoping to be able to expose you to those things that you need to consider when you're going to be exporting. And so I think that today's class is just absolutely a great topic to cover, to be able to put on your radar those things that you need to be concerned about and take into consideration. And you know, Graham has been doing this for a really long time, so he's a great person to contact about the, you know, the nuts and bolts and the specifics of these topics. And so I also want to, you know, kind of comment on the issue about trade agreements. You know, there's a lot of talk about deglobalization and things like that. And I think that it is going to change. Obviously, you know, we are going to have trade agreements going forward. But the one thing that I think is going to change is your responsibility to really monitor your supply chain and keeping tabs on, you know, who you're getting your supplies from, and really understanding in a very concrete and specific way just what the entire supply chain, just like exactly like it says. In many cases, I will ask somebody, so where do you get your stuff from? And they say, well, I get it from Bob in California. But the reality is that Bob gets his stuff from, you know, 8 other countries. And if you don't know that, that's kind of a problem. So monitoring your supply chain is going to be increasingly important. And as Graham said, obviously the doing business with those 21 countries that we have free trade agreements with is certainly low-hanging fruit, certainly minimizes the level of complications that can occur, provides a more level playing field. And so that's certainly a smart place to start. And to increase your exports to. Brazil would be, definitely one of the latter countries that I would consider, because there are, all sorts of complications there. But in any case, I certainly would like to open it up to questions. My apologies. Before I go there, I just want to remind everyone that this webinar in probably a couple of days is going to be on our Arkansas District Export Council YouTube channel. And Ms. Heidi has graciously put the link to that website on our chat. But let's go ahead and open it up to questions. If you guys want to unmute yourselves and ask your question, or if you want to type it in, but that's okay too. So let's go ahead and get that done. Miss Heidi, perhaps I'm missing it. Am I missing any questions that are in the chat?
I do not see any in the chat.
Okay, well, so sometimes I miss stuff, so I want to verify that. Now we've got somebody registered an attendee. Anyway, so if anybody has any questions at this point, it would be a good time to ask your question.
Easy questions, no hard questions.
Maybe that's the problem. That
there are no easy questions, right?
I've got plenty of hard questions myself.
Anyway, and also one last thing that I want to comment on. Yeah, obviously we want to try to provide the very best instruction and get you the information that you need. That's the reason why filling out the survey that Ms. Heidi showed in the chat box just a minute ago is really, really important to us. I think that we've done, over time, we've improved our classes and how we do things, because of the responses that we've received, the comments that we've received in the survey instruments. And so we obviously want to continue improving our offerings and making sure that we do that. Now, one of the last things that I really, really would like you to do, and it's really important, is that we want to do a doing business in X country for one of our webinars, hopefully in the next 30 days or so. And right now we have a couple of ideas of what country we might cover, but would really like to hear from you as to what countries you would be interested in our covering in a doing business in X country webinar, once again, that we hope to have put on in the next 30 days or so. Let's see here. We've got one question. Do you have any in-person meetings? At this point, we do not.
yes, actually we do, though.
Oh.
We will be meeting in Jonesboro in April.
That's right.
Guests are welcome to come to our quarterly meeting.
Right. I think that they were probably asking, I assumed that they were asking about a seminar as opposed to our quarterly meeting. So if you would like to attend our quarterly meeting, that you're welcome to do so. It's going to be in Jonesboro, and we'll have some more information about that. But in terms of the seminar versus webinar, we obviously pre-pandemic had done seminars, and quite frankly, were not particularly well attended, and so we switched over to a webinar format, first of all because that's what we had to do, and now we find that we have good participation, and that people kind of enjoy that format. It doesn't waste as much time, and you don't have to travel all the way from Arkadelphia to Little Rock or wherever we were having the seminar at the time. So that's kind of it. But if you would enter into the chat box what country you would like us to pay additional emphasis on in terms of doing business with that country, would very, very much appreciate it, because we're going to do one. So, you know, obviously we want to do whatever you guys are interested in our covering. And
Okay, so we've got a few answers already. Mexico, South America, Canada, Africa. We got to narrow that down. Haiti. Yeah, try to narrow it down to not a continent, but a country.
sure. Yeah. And you know, I mean, while the United States is extremely diversified, when we talk about, you know, Europe, or when we talk about Africa, I mean, those countries within those continents are real different from each other. It's not like some monolith. You know, it's very different. So, I mean, if you do business in Nigeria versus Kenya, pretty different, even though they're, you know, very
Right.
close to each other, culturally, demographically, economically, very, very different. Same thing in Europe, probably to not as great of a degree, but still plenty different. Yeah, great. Turkey, Ecuador, South Korea,
Okay.
keep them coming.
Keep them coming. Yes. The idea about Africa, though, is the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is currently, they've got an initiative called Advance with Africa. And they did a webinar with the National Association last fall. And I can find the link to that one. It's on their YouTube channel.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you post that on our website or what, Miss Heidi?
Yeah, I can send that out in the follow-up email.
Oh, great.
Everyone. Yeah, I'll find that.
All righty. Well, once again, if you guys would go to the trouble of filling out your survey and providing us the, you know, answers to the questions, and also in terms of the countries, that would be very, very useful. So unless someone has another question,
Let's see, where are we? Let's go to the next slide.
yeah, go ahead and go to the next slide, and that'll give them the contact information.
Really slow. I'm trying, and my computer's being very slow. I don't know what the deal is. Let's knock this down. Maybe that'll work. Okay. All right. Okay, let's stop the share and let's get this back going.
That's probably what it is that we need to stop the share.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, no. Let's see.
Well, maybe what we can do.
I must have too many
windows open or something.
or something.
Yeah, let's do this, Miss Heidi. Why don't you, on the follow-up email, why don't you go ahead and either take a picture of that slide or provide the information of the contact of Graham, myself, and obviously you as well. And if you have any questions, more suggestions, Sweden and Ghana, fantastic. Johannesburg, yeah. So if you have any questions of us, that's what we're here for. Please feel free to contact us. Miss Heidi will go ahead and send our contact information, and we hope to be able to hear from you. If you will remember that next Wednesday at 2 o'clock, just like this week, we're going to be having the last class of the 6-part series on financing, exports, and all that entails. Going to be a very informative class. I hope that you will choose to attend it, and also for those of you who perhaps maybe started the series a little bit late, all the classes are available on our YouTube channel, and
There we go.
oh, great! If
Wow.
if you're able to go back into the YouTube channel and go through the other classes, it's on the honor system, and we will provide you with our basics of exporting certificate. There it is right there. You might want to take a picture of that.
Yeah.
There's Graham's information, mine as well, and Jonathan Bricker, who's the current chair of the deck, but was not able to attend today. His contact information is there, and Ms. Heidi, her information is there as well. And as it says there, next week, managing payments and financing, and that'll be the last class of this 6-part series. We obviously will continue having other classes, but
Yeah.
in terms of the Grow Your Export series, next week will be the last one. And I think with that, we will close it out.
Yes. Okay.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much again, and hope to see you all next week.
Yes.
Thank you.